Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everybody, and welcome to Pangolin, the Conservation Podcast, the show dedicated to exploring and amplifying the world's underappreciated conservation stories. The stories that inspire me, and I hope will inspire you too. I'm your host, Jack Baker, and today we have our first animal-dedicated episode of the podcast, for season 6. The last two have been all sorts of things, but this one is all about one fantastic creature. Today I am joined by Craig Standridge, the Education Curator for the Northwest Trek Wildlife Park, whose work and enthusiasm for, you probably guessed from the title and description, the Red Wolf, is truly fantastic. He's here to discuss this incredible creature, its story, its future, and all of the incredible work that has gone on across the USA to help protect it. We also talk a lot about outreach, respect for local communities who exist within the wolves' kind of space, and kind of how these things are all dependent on each other, and how we can creatively engage people in conservation. And this also involves talking about an expansion to a board game, which is something I'd never heard of in conservation before, and I love it, and it's brilliant, and it's great. Finally, of course, we also discuss his favourite underappreciated species, which I won't spoil completely for you, but I was so excited about because it's a type of snail, and we barely ever talk about snails, and so I'm so excited. However, having said all that, I will let Craig come on and do his thing. Without further ado, let's get started. And welcome back to the show. I am now joined by Craig Standridge, the Education Curator for the Northwest Trek Wildlife Park. He's here to talk about a project which he worked on, which is about one of the most incredible, interesting, amazing conservation stories I think I've heard. I'm so excited to talk to him all about the amazing, the wonderful, the really interesting red wolf. Thank you so much for joining me today, Craig. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's my first podcast, so I'm really excited. And I wanted to thank you and the Pangolin for sharing the story of the American red wolf.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited that you are to kind of chat about it. And yes, it's my absolute pleasure. Now, to get us started, every single week, I think, I ask the guest to introduce themselves, because I know obviously what your LinkedIn or what the websites that you're kind of featured on say, but I don't know any more than that. So I think you are probably the best person to introduce yourself. So could you tell the listeners a little bit about who you are?
Absolutely. Well, hello, listeners. Thanks for joining us. My name is Craig Standridge, and I'm actually the Nature Engagement Curator at Northwest Trek Wildlife Park in Eatonville, Washington, United States of America. We changed our name from Education to Nature Engagement recently because we wanted a name that was more descriptive and more visionary and more inspiring about what we were trying to achieve. And the reason I'm here talking with everyone today and with Jack on the Pangolin is that I'm also the Vice Program Leader of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums American Red Wolf Saving Animals from Extinction program. And we couldn't find a longer name, but we tried. And so, Jack, I'd also like to share a little bit of flavor with the listeners, some of my favorite things, just to connect them a little bit with me. So besides American Red Wolves, I love being outdoors in nature. I love video games. I love Iron Maiden. And most of all, I love spending time with my wife and her family. Now, they hail from Colombia in South America, and they've taught me so much about empathy, about the importance of family, and how not to be so darn uptight. So shout out to the Santiagos. Love you all.
Oh, that is fantastic. And I love that because, whenever I feel like sometimes we get too quickly into let's talk about nature and wildlife. It's nice to know more about like you as a person. I think that's fantastic. And I think, I have to ask because I've always been a Nintendo boy at heart ever since I was young. When you say video games, are we Nintendo? Are we PlayStation? Are we Xbox? Just to really divide the listeners up before we get started.
I am everything. So I did also grow up originally as an Atari boy. Mm-hmm. So I've been around for a while. I'm 50 years old. So I've been here from the beginning. So Atari, Nintendo, PlayStation, Xbox, Steam Deck, all of it.
That's fantastic. Yes, brilliant. We've pleased all of the audiences there as well. We're not exclusively one team, and hopefully it means that if one day down the line one of these massive game companies decided for whatever reason they want to sponsor me, they'll all still be happy. No, that's fantastic and absolutely brilliant. And yeah, it's nice to know a little bit more about you and what makes you kind of tick. I guess it actually leads us well nicely into a question that I had for you, which is like, all of these things make you who you are, but obviously a big part of your life and your story is that you are really involved in conservation and wildlife and nature. You said you love being outdoors and doing all of these things. Where did that kind of like love come from, do you think?
Yeah, well, Jack, I've got a story for you. So I grew up in central New York, New York State, and that's in the village of Chittenango. So it's a rural dairy farming area with an abundance of nature and natural areas to explore. And what simply first drew me to nature was the access I had to it. I lived on a 2.5 acres of land. We had a wildlife refuge bordering our property, so I could just venture out into the woods anytime I wanted to. And it was at a time where it was safe to do that. So as an only child, I had a very vivid imagination and was always going out on quests and adventures in the outdoors. And as I got older, into my early teens, my mother encouraged me to join outdoor focus groups, I think mostly because she wanted to just get me out of the house because of all the energy I had. Mm-hmm. And the one that really captured my interest was the Sierra Club. I gravitated towards them because they focused on being outdoors, learning about nature, and self-discovery. So it was much less structured, with less rules than some of the other groups I'd tried out, which for me really worked. And what's really amazing, and the heart of this story, is that I can tie my pursuit of a career in conservation to one moment. And that moment happened while I was in the Sierra Club. Now, our group leader was led by an amazing man. His name is Chuck Muniak. He took us on several camping trips in one of my favorite spots in the world, the Adirondack Mountains in New York State. And he always took time to connect with us individually on these trips. And I can vividly remember on one of our trips, we're sitting by a lake in the middle of the Adirondacks, nature all around us. It was Chuck, myself, and his 2 giant dogs. And he just looked at me and asked me what I wanted to do for a career. And I replied, I'm not really sure, but I'd love for it to be something related to the outdoors. And so he said, simply, then make it happen. Now, luckily, he followed that up with some more information, because that wouldn't have been very helpful if he'd left it at that. But he said to me, you're going to have a lot of choices in your life. You're the one that has to make them and to own them. If you truly want a career in conservation, then you need to make those choices starting now that lead you down that path. And he shared with me that the college that we have our monthly meetings at, which was the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse, another long name, was a great school to aspire to attend as a key step towards reaching these goals. Mm-hmm. So the next meeting we had at the college in that giant lecture hall, which at 15 years of old looked pretty large and intimidating, but I just looked around that hall and I breathed in deep, and I decided at that moment that I was going to do everything I could to attend that school. And so that's what I did from that moment. I applied myself particularly to science and math, as they were really important to the school. I volunteered for environmental organizations. I learned everything I could about nature, particularly the nature of New York. And eventually I did attend that school, which did indeed propel me towards a career in conservation. And it all comes back, it ties back to that one moment with Chuck. And it's truly amazing that one moment like that can shape a person's life. One experience at the right time, at the right moment, can be a powerful catalyst that propels you towards a goal. And certainly my previous experiences in nature and the encouragement of my parents fueled that and helped create fertile soil for that seed of opportunity that was planted on that day.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. Sorry, were you going to say something else?
Oh, yeah. Only about 2/3 done with this beautiful story.
Oh, well, I'm so sorry. I keep going. I thought it reached such a beautiful moment. I was like, I need to ask questions, but no, keep going.
No, I got to segue it into the red wolves.
Perfect.
So after graduating college, I pursued a career as a park ranger in the city of New York and then the state of North Carolina. And to me, I chose that specific job because it seemed like the ideal sampler platter of conservation. You got to do so many different things. I could figure out what I wanted to truly focus on. So I had the opportunity to explore the realms of environmental education, law enforcement, wilderness rescue, firefighting, and have experiences, one-of-a-kind, unique experiences like being on the Central Park Rollerblade Patrol and providing security for the Dalai Lama when he spoke in Central Park. So all of that was fantastic, but what really inspired and fulfilled me was connecting people to wildlife and wild places. And so that led me to Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium in Tacoma, Washington, where I was a conservation engagement coordinator for 18 years before moving to Northwest Trek Wildlife Park. Now, early on in this experience, the Red Wolf coordinator at his time, a gentleman by the name of William Waddell, was looking for someone to be an education advisor for the Red Wolf program. And at the time, I'd not even heard of red wolves, and I was completely shocked. It blew my mind to discover that red wolves had been in North Carolina the entire time I was a ranger there for all those years, and I knew nothing about them. I didn't even know they existed. So that shock and that surprise turned into inspiration to inspire me to become the education advisor and pursue the mission of raising awareness of red wolves, their story, and the need for people to engage in their conservation.
No, that's so fantastic. That is brilliant. And the unexpected link I have to that story, which you'll probably not believe is actually the link that I'm going to make, is strangely, my father was also part of a group of people who had to provide security for the Dalai Lama when he visited Scotland. So a very strange, weird link in our lives. It really had nothing to do with me, but there's an interesting connection there. And yeah, I so much to it. I love the fact that I think so many people have these moments where they realize exactly what they want to do, and for some people those come later, they come earlier, and it's interesting always to hear when it happens and how it happens. And it's amazing when you can give, and it's always nice to give credit, I think, to the person who helps you along the way. So that was actually very, very brilliant and wonderful, and I think, yeah, so nice to hear. And yes, again, so many thoughts leads into kind of the red wolf story. It was a perfect answer. That, yeah, I guess leads into that kind of red wolf story perfectly. I guess before we get into your role and maybe how you were involved more deeply and how you're still involved, it would be good to maybe introduce that character a little bit more, because we've heard about your story and your background and what you do, but we've not heard a lot about the wolf. So could you tell us a little bit about it and what makes it special?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll just start with their physical description and some statistics about red wolves, and then go a little bit more into their behavior and what makes them so unique and special. So American red wolves, they've got wide heads with broad muzzles, tall, pointed, distinctive ears, and long, slender legs with large feet. They stand about 26 inches or 66 centimeters tall and are about 4 feet or 1.2 meters long from the tip of their nose to the tip of their tail. They weigh typically between 45 and 80 pounds or 20 to 36 kilograms. And their coloration is mostly brown and buff. And I had to look up what buff actually meant. I've been saying it for so many years, but it's a light brownish yellow, which does fit. And they have some black along their backs and a reddish color on their ears, head, and legs. And I think it's more of a cinnamon color to me. So which is a kind of red. They're just absolutely beautiful animals. And their preferred diet is white-tailed deer, but they also eat raccoons, rabbits, and other small mammals. They're opportunistic feeders, so it really just depends on what happens to be around when they're hunting. And they are social animals that live in close-knit packs, generally 5 to 8 of them, which includes a breeding pair and offspring from different years. And then most of those offspring at the age of about 1 or 2 will leave the pack or disperse to form their own pack, but some of them do stay with their close-knit family unit. And they do tend to form pair life bonds, mating once per year, generally in February, and have an average of 2 to 5 pups, typically being born in April and May. So you have about a 2-month gestation before the pups are born. And they are a very shy wolf, which actually goes quite counter to some of the perception, particularly from European folklore about wolves. So they're elusive, generally avoiding people and people's activities, and they're crepuscular, which means they're most active at dusk and dawn. And as far as their range and how much space they need, telemetry studies that we've done indicate that their range requirements vary from around 20 to 80 square miles or 52 to 207 square kilometers, very dependent on the available prey. And the coolest thing about it, the most favoriteest thing for me about these wolves, is that the American red wolf is the only wolf that is found only in the United States of America, which is why we are calling it the American red wolf.
That's really interesting, actually, because yes, I guess because there are wolves that exist kind of along the border in the southern states, and there's I didn't know that's really, really interesting, actually. And it's interesting to hear about the kind of shyness, and I suppose maybe that is part of the reason why you were less aware of them, because they're not something that would make themselves known, even if you were spending all of this time in nature and all of this time around kind of things while you were younger. But I think on the other side of the coin, that maybe the other reason why you wouldn't have seen them too often or experienced them is that they do have a really interesting and really tricky, complicated conservation story as well, which is I was going to say which is, and then try and explain it, but I think you would do much better at that than me. So could you tell the listeners a bit about it?
Yeah, like most conservation stories, it's got ups and it's got downs.
Yep.
And this is certainly emblematic of that. So the American red wolf is actually the world's most endangered wolf. So, which is not a record you really want to have, but there it is. They once were common throughout the eastern and south central United States. If you look at a map of the continental U.S. and look at about the eastern third of it is about where their range used to be, and they were plentiful. But they were decimated by the early 20th century with colonization, intensive predator control programs, as well as habitat degradation and alteration. And so, due to all that, they were designated as threatened with extinction under the Endangered Species Preservation Act in 1967, and then fully listed under the Endangered Species Act in 1973. And at that time in history, their range went from basically the eastern third of the United States to a small corner of southeast Texas and southwest Louisiana. Mm-hmm. So fortunately, at that time, the Endangered Species Act designation allowed the United States Fish and Wildlife Service to establish a formal recovery program and begin collecting American red wolves from the wild to establish a program for breeding them under human care as a last-ditch effort to prevent their extinction. Mm-hmm. And you might be wondering, how close were they to extinction? Well, Jack, I'm going to tell you. These efforts yielded 17 wolves, just 17. And out of those 17, only 14 of them actually bred. So 14 of those founded the future for the American red wolves. And those 14 wolves were moved to Point Defiance Zoo Aquarium in Tacoma, Washington, and quite actually saved the species. And you might be wondering, why would they take the wolves from Texas, Louisiana, and move them about as far across the country as you can get into the Pacific Northwest? Well, there's two main reasons for that. And the first one is that the United States Fish and Wildlife Service was looking for a partner that would dedicate to the long-term conservation of the species, not a simple undertaking. It's a lot of effort. It's a lot of, financial impacts, but Point Defiance was ready to step up to the plate. And also at that time, heartworm was not present in the Pacific Northwest. So it was a great spot to help ensure the maximum potential of success for the breeding program. Mm-hmm. And so in 1987, American red wolves were reintroduced to eastern North Carolina because actually in 1980, they had been declared extinct in the wild. So the only remaining wolves were actually in the breeding program. Mm-hmm. So 1987, reintroduced to eastern North Carolina in an area that includes federal, state, and private lands. Now, the wild population from that point peaked in 2012 with an estimated 100 to 120 red wolves. However, the population began to rapidly decline, unfortunately, in 2021, mostly due to anthropogenic mortality. So the top two reasons for that were gunshot and vehicle strikes, so car accidents hitting a wolf. Yep. And currently, an estimated only 21 to 23 wild American red wolves exist. Now, fortunately, The collaborators in the breeding program have grown to the point that we now have 50 different facilities across the United States that are an active part of this conservation story. So there's currently 266 American red wolves living under human care at these facilities. Now, we're only able to accomplish all this because of all the hard work and dedication of the partners working together, which is facilitated and empowered by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums Saving Animals from Extinction program. Being a member of this program gives us the resources, the support to focus on collaboration and implement strategic conservation, stakeholder engagement activities, all of which are essential to the survival of the American red wolf.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's so interesting, and it's interesting. I enjoy. I mean, it's an interesting story for so many different reasons, because you have, I think, at least in Europe, I don't know if it's the same in the US, but a lot of the time when we use examples of zoos and these kind of breeding programs, the ones that we kind of fall back on a lot are the Przewalski's horse and the Per David's deer, and it's interesting to hear kind of another kind of example of that, where these kind of captive breeding programs really can help a species survive when it gets right to that very, very brink of a really dangerous place of being so close to being lost. And it's so that's incredibly interesting and inspiring. And it was, very, very lucky that the government and everybody involved recognized that need when they did, and were able to kind of push this kind of thing going on. And it's amazing to see how it's kind of grown from maybe one kind of zoo and aquarium across to such a big program that is, hopefully able to maintain this kind of population in the years going forward as well. That's so exciting. I guess it also highlighted, though, a couple challenges and things that were maybe going on behind the scenes that I and have gone on probably for years and years and years, that are difficult to kind of deal with and contend with. And obviously, in the first instance, these animals were pushed kind of down to maybe a very small population. Then they came back, and then they were pushed down again. And as you said, it was kind of these anthropogenic threats. And I know, being in Scotland, there's a lot of discussion about should there be wolves reintroduced? Should there not be wolves reintroduced? Should there be other animals like lynx introduced or not? And so I like all of these kind of anthropogenic things always seem to follow wolves wherever they go and wherever they exist. And I wondered if we could talk a little bit more about that, and those challenges, were they, do you think, are things like, I suppose cars and things like that are unintentional, maybe collisions, but when it's gunshot wounds, is there kind of a challenge there with people not wanting them around? Like what is that conflict a bit more in a bit more detail?
Yeah, I think regarding the gunshots, it can be difficult to tell, but we do know for sure that many of them are unintentional, which is why the Fish and Wildlife Service puts so much effort into hunter education programs. So they can be confused to the untrained eye with coyotes, which are also not very well perceived in the red wolf recovery area. But in general, Jack, wolves and other large carnivores tend to be polarizing species no matter where you are. Many people feel strongly about them, some positive, some negative. The folklore and stories such as Little Red Riding Hood have helped frame wolves as having nefarious intent, and sayings such as a wolf in sheep's clothing doesn't really help the case for the wolves. And so for that perspective, in general, wolves face an uphill conservation battle. But it's really interesting to contrast the more European-based negative folklore view of wolves with the indigenous view, particularly of the Cherokee Nation in the United States. The Cherokee view red wolves as cousins or family members, as equals, as partners that have helped them hunt, locate, and build villages and provide for the nation. In fact, there's an entire clan, the Wolf Clan, in the Cherokee Nation. So it's really interesting to contrast the colonial view and the indigenous view. There's quite a lot that we being Westerners, can learn from traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous cultural perspectives.
That's really interesting, actually, because I think it's not something that we discuss necessarily in the UK, is this relationship with wolves. And it's interesting to hear about that kind of important indigenous relationship that's there. That's really, really interesting to hear. I wondered, is that something that, like, does that, just to pick your brains a bit more, is that something that like the project takes into account a lot? Is that something that kind of those perspectives are brought in intentionally because they are the best and they do know more than potentially others involved? Is that something that is considered, or is it more of kind of a, I don't know, like an advisory? Like, is that something that happens?
Yeah, and actually it's even broader than that. It's not necessarily specific to Indigenous perspectives. It's more the public in general. So the biggest challenge in recovering American rebels, in my mind, is the public perception and involvement. But in many cases, challenges can also be opportunities. So conservation simply can't be achieved without partnerships. To make wild recovery efforts successful, we need to apply the lessons of empathy to the communities in which rebels reside. And that means listening, truly listening to what these community members have to say, taking their concerns and their ideas seriously, and engaging with them frequently. It means approaching the relationship as a true partnership, building things with the community, not for them, which is something we've done in the past, is we've tried to say, hey, here's the solution we have. Hope you like it. But instead saying, hey, this is what we want to do. This is the big picture. We want red wolves to be thriving in the landscape, not just surviving. How can we work together to get there? So practically, that means collaborating with state wildlife agencies, local governmental entities, affected federal agencies, landowners, and Indigenous tribes. And importantly, and a focal point of it, is consulting with tribal nations when developing conservation plans. They and all of their traditional knowledge can be incredibly valuable as a guiding beacon with these plans. And so we have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and all the Red Wolf partners have put this more in our mindset in the last few years about being very intentional about that. And so the only way to move perception about large carnivores like American red wolves from negative to positive is to treat recovery area communities with respect, which builds trust over time. And that approach gives us the best possible chance for American red wolves to be successful in the wild.
That's fantastic. That's really, really interesting to hear. Really, really interesting. And yeah, it's interesting to hear, yes, getting all of these stakeholders around the table to design things that actually work, not just for the species that you're trying to save, but for the people who have to exist round about them. It's a really, really interesting example of kind of this idea that conservation isn't always about just the animals, or the plants or the river or the forest, or it's about the entire system that works around it. It's a really interesting example of that. Really, really interesting. And I guess obviously that comes back to a lot of your responsibility and your job, and your involvement within the project is kind of dealing with the kind of education side, getting that kind of story out there and engaging the people. And I wondered, how did that process work, and does it work now? Like, what is that story there?
Yeah, so the engagement aspect, or what we're calling now the human dimensions aspect, is one of the three focal points of our new Saving Animals from Extinction 5-year plan that we're working on right now. So It's important enough that it's one of three focal points that we're looking at. And it's not just about engaging with landowners in recovery area. It's about building public support. It's about sharing inspiring stories, connecting people, using the empathy best practices to connect people to those animals by sharing stories, by providing videos and social media engagement, and doing innovative new things like creating an expansion to a board game. So we're doing lots of things to engage people in lots of different ways, because like you were saying previously, the story isn't just about the animals.
Yeah.
They are dependent on people for their very survival and their ability to thrive. So engagement is one of the most important things we can do. But if I may, I'd like to talk about a couple of other challenges other than human dimensions that come to mind.
Yeah, that would be really, really interesting. That's perfect. And you're doing my job for me, which makes my life easier by leading the conversation. You take away what other challenges do you think are really worth mentioning?
Yeah, so besides human dimensions, three of them really come to mind. And so some of these are historic challenges, but all of them resonate into our contemporary time and will resonate into the future. So one of those major challenges was growing the number of facilities involved in the breeding of American red wolves under human care. As we talked about previously, it's an incredible amount of work to build this network. And it's a big responsibility to take on, particularly because we're looking for long-term partners. And these partners need to commit to providing world-class care for the wolves, which is a significant undertaking. It's a critical component of the SAFE program. For the wolves to be successful in the wild, we need to have enough of a population to draw upon for current and future wild populations. It's taken quite a bit of time and effort to get to the current level of 50 partners, basically 50 years, over 50 years since we started this effort at Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium, and we're always looking for more. But beyond that, historically and in the future as well, finding suitable locations for wild reintroduction is also quite the challenge. One of the primary reasons for the decline of the American red wolf in the wild was habitat degradation and alteration, and that has not changed. It's very challenging to find locations that have enough space for a wild population, but also have an adequate prey base and aren't too close to major roadways, etc. So this is definitely going to be one of our major undertakings as we strive to increase the number of wild populations on the landscape in the future. And then finally, maintaining maximum genetic diversity of the population under human care is a major challenge. So we started with only 14 founder lines, and over time, 2 of those have been lost. So we currently have 12 founders represented in the genetics of the population of American red wolves. We're incredibly fortunate, though, that we have talented population managers, statistics wizards, and scientists who work with and advise the program. Every year, the SAFE program meets in the summer, and a critical part of this meeting is determining breeding pairs and matchups, if you were. So it's like American red wolf matchmaking. And the genetic diversity of potential offspring is one of the most important factors in making decisions for the following year's matchups. So those are some of the other challenges we face. It's not the only challenges, but these are the primary ones that we focus a lot of our attention on.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think it's something that, I guess, having worked in zoos and things before, I think sometimes you talk to people and they're like, oh, are you not just trying to get as many baby lions or tigers or whatever it is as possible out of like whatever? And it's trying to explain, no, it's not about just having as many as possible. There's so much behind that as well, of that, as you say, matchmaking and making sure that it doesn't just increase in number, it remains as a viable population, that these genes are represented properly and healthily, and all of these things is really interesting. And as for the kind of the areas where do you introduce these things, again, I guess that kind of goes back to the human dimension. It goes back to all sorts of different things where, and it's one of those problems which I'm glad there are people working on, but I'm also glad it's not my problem to try and solve, because it seems like there's so many wires that would get crossed and factors that you have to consider there, that it would be incredibly difficult. But I'm so glad that it's happening. Because it must be, when you sit down and work out all of these things, it must be just a headache sometimes to go, well, we could put them here or there. It's really, really interesting. Really, really interesting. And I guess it turns us on to looking forward, I suppose, because when there is all these kind of things going on and all of these kind of challenges or things to consider, there's so many possible pathways you could go down. You could try and grow certain aspects. You could put money into one place rather than another. You could do so. What is the future of it? How does it go from here? What is the story? Yeah, what is the next chapter of this story?
Yeah, Jack, that is a great question, and it's a perfect time to ask it, because boy, do I have a golden nugget of an answer for you. So, just last month, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service released the revised recovery plan for the American red wolf, and this is only the 3rd revision to date, so it's quite a big deal. The recovery plan, it's an overview of the strategy behind recovery of this species. It's all about the American red wolf. So I look at it like a roadmap to recovery. This plan gives us the destination or the end point. In other words, what recovery and what success for the red wolf is going to look like. Yeah. The next step of this process, which will be fueled by this report, is the recovery implementation strategy. And that's the operational plan that gets us to that success endpoint. So basically, it's like the route and the stops along the way of the destination on our road to recovery. But before I go into more detail, I have to give a special shout out to the architect of this endeavor, Emily Weller. So Emily is the coordinator of the Red Wolf Recovery Program for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. She has been the champion in getting this document across the finish line, which was no easy task. To accomplish this, she distilled the thoughts, hopes, and vision of 53 recovery team members into a concise, informative, and eloquently written document. I truly consider it to be a masterpiece. I encourage all your listeners to read it. It's a public document, so it's only a quick web search away.
I will pop a link for listeners. I will interrupt briefly to say I'll pop a link to that in the description of the episode so people can go and find it, and while we're chatting they can flick through and have a read, and then once they're done listening they can get properly into the details. Just to interrupt briefly, but yes, please continue.
Perfect. All right. Shall we get back into the meat of the plan, as it were?
Yes.
Okay. One important thing is to mention that this is a 50-year plan. So this is a long-term scoped document. The vision of the plan is that American red wolves will coexist with humans across multiple viable populations in the historic range. We also envision the recovery of the American red wolf providing a strong sense of community ownership, cultural importance, and pride. So the program is absolutely ambitious, but it's absolutely achievable.
Yeah.
So the details of this, so what actually we need to do, the work that needs to be done, is expanding the distribution of the species, prioritizing collaborative conservation to address species threats, as well as societal values related to American red wolf recovery. So that's those anthropogenic mortality effects, that's the human dimensions work, all of that. So we want to increase the population abundance, maintain genetic diversity long-term, and reduce mortality. So for the safe populations, so those are the wolves that are raised and cared for under human care, we want to get that up from the 266 it is now to 400 wolves. We want to focus on behaviorally sustainable wolves for reintroduction. So basically what that means is that we need to retain as much wildness as possible in those wolves so that they don't get habituated to humans, and then when we put them into the wild, it just sets them up for failure if they're like that. So as wild as possible. We also want to reduce that mortality rate by 50%, particularly the gunshot and the vehicle strike mortality. Now, the delisting criteria, so what it would take to get them off the endangered species list, would be we must have 3 viable wild populations occurring within the American red wolf historic range, and they're distributed in such a way to maximize species redundancy, which what that basically means is protect the species from a catastrophic loss event. And those populations must meet the following metrics. So one of 3 of those populations needs to have 180 individuals, and the other 2 have to have a minimum of 280 individuals. And at least 80% of the current and future founder gene diversity in those wolves needs to be maintained. Population must be stable or growing for a period of 10 years without extensive human intervention after meeting those minimum numbers. And then finally, as if we didn't have enough to do, each population has to have a 95% probability of persistence for 100 years. So when you do a population viability analysis, it has to come up as at least 95%. So we've got our work cut out for us, I'd say.
Yep. There's a lot of boxes there that need to be ticked and a lot of things that need to be done. But it's interesting to see that it's 50 years, because that is, I think what's encouraging about that is I think in conservation and in nature and wildlife things, a lot of the time funding or support for projects is very much done in like, oh, we'll give you 6 months or a year or a couple of years of funding or support. And it's amazing to see a plan that looks so far into the future and goes, this is the plan, and if we stick to it, and if we do these things and we tick these boxes, this is the pathway. Is really, really interesting. And it's something that, I'm going to go and have a proper read through after this and go, is this a model that like this is, that should be applied to all sorts of other species? It's really, really interesting. Really, really interesting to think. Because I don't think I've seen anything as long as 50 years before. Like that's really interesting.
Well, and what's great about this document is that there is a lot of science and a lot of analysis behind it. We didn't just
Yeah.
throw a dart at a dartboard and say, oh, 50 years, sure.
Yep.
No, it's population viability assessments, it's species status assessments, it's all sorts of scientists coming together and running all sorts of different models and coming up with what we think is the best case scenario, while also referencing in the document that we need to be cognizant and conscious and adaptive to things like climate change, because that's going to affect the red wolves for sure. So, and affecting everyone. So yeah, it's an ambitious plan. We think we can do it. And what I love about it though is that it gives us that endpoint. It's a solid point to put all our efforts towards. And that's what gets me so excited about it.
Yes. I think that's the thing, is sometimes when you look forward into the many pathways you could go down and the things that like it can get confusing and just kind of disengaging, I suppose, when you think, oh, well, this is kind of this is this thing, or like this is maybe this thing, or maybe so to have that plan, it must be so fantastic and encouraging. And yes, is there any element, I suppose you're more involved in the kind of outreach, kind of getting people involved side. Is there something in the plan that really makes you excited from that perspective?
I think what really gets me excited is working on the safe aspect, the saving animals from extinction part of it. Is we're developing a shorter plan, a 5-year focus, but we're using this as our beacon, as our guiding light, this recovery plan adaptation. So that gives us exactly what we need to focus on. So we can take it in 5-year chunks. And so it's working on expanding the number of cooperators to get that up to that 400 wolves. It's working on maintaining that genetic diversity, and it's working on the human dimensions aspects. And so that's what really gets me really jazzed up about it.
Yes. And I have to ask, given you told me you're a fan of video games at the start, and you mentioned there's a board game aspect potentially, is that something that like, was that your idea, or was that someone else raised it and you're just
no, but it is connected to the Red Wolf Safe work, and if I may, I can go into how people can support the American Red Wolf, because I've got a whole list of things that people can do to get engaged, and I'd love to share it.
That is brilliant. Yes, tell us more.
All right. Well, first I just want to say, there's so many ways for people to become engaged with American red wolf conservation, more than there ever have been. And people are the drivers behind conservation action, as we've already shared. And there is no way that this majestic animal, the American red wolf, can survive without our help. So the first thing you can do is learn more about red wolves. It's a perfect way to get inspired to become involved. There's a ton of information about natural history, conservation efforts, and scientific research out there. Since as we're recording this, it's spooky season, it's near Halloween. So I was thinking a lot about the research that's being done in Texas and Louisiana on American red wolf ghost alleles that are present in coyote populations there. So there's some fascinating contemporary research being done that is just really exciting to learn about. And then, of course, once you learn about that, sharing it with people on social media, letting your friends and family know about it, spreading the word about it. That collective communication can lead to collective power and focus on the wolves, and that can make some great things happen. And another great way to connect with American red wolves, if you happen to be in the States, is to visit a facility that has them on habitat. As I said, we've got 50 different facilities around the country. Not all of them actually have red wolves on for visitors to see, but many of them do. And there's nothing quite like making eye contact with these magnificent animals. And while you're visiting the wolves, talk to one of their caretakers. Learn how you can support their facility through volunteering or other methods of support. And if you're a student, the American Red Wolf makes a fascinating student project, no matter what grade level you are. If you're a more advanced student, you can do your own population viability analysis. Replicate and try to run the numbers that the scientists have. Maybe you can contribute something to the program. You never know. There's a lot of smart kids out there. And if you're able to give financial support, I'd like to highlight two fantastic organizations in North Carolina, so in the recovery state. So the Red Wolf Coalition has been advocating for and supporting red wolf conservation since 1997. And then the organization Champions for Wildlife is a newer organization, but it's made a lot of great strides and steps towards educating kids and being very responsive to community needs. And so they inspire kids to fall in love with wildlife through art and education, and the American red wolf is one of the species they champion. And of course, also, if you're in the United States, engaging with your federal representatives to let them know you support American red wolf conservation is an option that's available. The more people that engage their representatives, the more attention they will focus on conservation and things that are important to their constituents. If you happen to be working at a wildlife facility and think you might have the capacity to become part of the breeding collaboration, reach out to me. Let us know. We can provide more details about what's involved. And then finally, if you're an artist, a creative, and you want to use your talents to help advance American red wolf conservation, reach out to us and let us know. We're always looking for innovative new ways to engage people with wolves, such as... Now, Jack, are you familiar with the board game Endangered from the Grand Gamers Guild?
I am not, but I feel like I should be. I've given the name. I feel like it's right up my street.
I think you must. I think you're honor bound to check it out now. Yeah.
I'm writing it down as you speak.
Yes. So it's a cooperative game all about wildlife survival. So you play as a team of wildlife conservationists working towards safeguarding animal populations amidst ecological threats. And guess what? There is an American red wolf expansion scenario coming soon. So it recently just wrapped up a successful Kickstarter crowdfunding run. And so once those orders are fulfilled, it should be available. So check in frequently with the Grand Gamers Guild website, maybe shoot them an email and ask them when it's going to be available for the public. And one really cool fact about that is that expansion was created by Lindsay Olympio, who works at the Endangered Wolf Center in Missouri, one of our cooperators, and her husband, Jonathan. So those are just a few, actually that's quite a lot, of options for becoming a part of American red wolf conservation story. My message to you is this: don't be a lone wolf. Come join the pack.
That is fantastic. Yep. And I love the different options for different people. And I love the fact that anyone can be involved. And I love, because I think sometimes, people perceive conservation as just people sitting down and doing science or doing something that is so out of their comfort zone or out of something that they are able to do or whatever. But it's not. It's supporting these board games or supporting the kind of art or the creation of things or support and just going on a day out to a local zoo or aquarium or wherever all of these things can make a huge difference. And I think, yes, you've provided an option for so many different people. It's absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And yes, I guess before we go, because we are reaching the end of our time, I do have a couple last quick questions for you to kind of wrap up that I ask every guest, if you don't mind, if we have the time, which I always think, go back to the beginning and tell us a little bit more about you and a little bit more about some other things that you maybe care about. And I should also say before we get into these, all of the links for everything you just mentioned, I will put in the description of the episode. So listeners, there is no excuse. Go down, have a look, click on things, explore all the different options and social media and websites and board games, everything. Go and do that because, yes, it's amazing. And yes, love it. I'm so excited to go and learn more myself after all this. It sounds like there's so much going on. But yes, back to the questions I ask everybody. The first of which, and this started last series, and I think I'm continuing it this series because it got some really interesting answers, which is, aside from the red wolf, because we can't have you say the same thing twice, what is your favourite underappreciated species, whether it be plant or animal? What is something that listeners should know more about and you want to shine a spotlight on now for them to go and maybe learn more about?
Yeah, absolutely. And this was a great one. I had to think for a second, and then it just hit me. There's one from my hometown. If you remember, that was Chittenango, New York. And so my favorite underappreciated species actually has something in common with the red wolf, although the connection isn't immediately obvious, is the Chittenango ovate amber snail. And I bet you didn't think I was going to say that, did you, Jack?
Nope. And I'm so glad you did, because we do not have enough representation for things like this on the show. So please tell me more.
Yeah. So it's a terrestrial snail, and it's listed as endangered in New York State and threatened federally. So it was abundant when first discovered in 1905, but now currently estimated that there are less than 25 left in the wild, which is the connection to the red wolf. It's found only in one spot in the world, on the vegetated slopes near Chittenango Falls, which is in a state park, thankfully. The snails are small, about the size of a fingertip. They live an average of about 2.5 years. They feed on the microflora that's in the spray zone of the waterfall, so a pretty specific feeding pattern there. And so my alma mater, the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry, is working right now to save them by introducing snails bred under human care to new waterfall homes in the area. But it's going to be several years before they can determine if their efforts are successful.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. I'm always a fan of a snail conservation story, because yes, the things like the Partula snail and all of these, we don't talk about snails enough. We don't, and they are interesting, fascinating, and have equally as interesting conservation stories as things that are bigger and maybe more people talk about all of the time. That is a fantastic answer. Well,
and I'll share another gem with you. What about slugs? Do you talk a lot about slugs?
I don't, so I would like to learn more if there's another story there.
I'll just tell you that the facility I work at, Northwest Trek Wildlife Park, actually has in July Slugfest. So we have an entire festival around banana slugs, and recently we celebrated the 40th anniversary of that. So we are legit.
I love that. I think that's fantastic, because we get caught up on the big cuddly things sometimes, I think, and we forget about the slimy little things that provide the basis for what everything else lives on, and everything. They are core to everything, yet under-loved and underappreciated. So that is brilliant. Fantastic. I guess the next question that I ask everyone is, if you could give the audience a piece of advice on how they can be more involved in conservation, aside from the big list, I guess from your own experience, maybe something, what advice would you give them?
Yeah. I think the first thing is, and it was something that's worked really well for me, is find a species or a cause that you are really passionate about and go all in. You can make much more of an impact this way than if you spread around, which is great to do, but I just think if you find a passion and then just go for it and see what you can do to get involved, you can just one person can make a huge impact. And volunteering, there's many, many community science projects around the world that need dedicated volunteers to support conservation efforts. And usually the organizations, whether it be state or regional or federal conservation organizations, they just simply don't have the resources to get a lot of that conservation work done. And they are increasingly relying on community science volunteers to do that work. And you can be from any walk of life and do that. You don't have to know a thing. They will provide on-the-job training for you. Mm-hmm. And one tool that I've found really, really effective in engaging people with nature is the app iNaturalist. Are you familiar with that, Jack?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. So if you aren't familiar, for the listeners, it's basically a massive biological inventory database. You can visit anywhere in the world and document your observations of the natural life there, the plants and animals. And the data that you collect, once verified, it's open source. It's available to students, researchers, organizations, anyone who could benefit from it. It's a great way to be engaged with and learn more about the nature that's nearby you. And there's also every year the City Nature Challenge. That's a good link to put in there, because that's always fun towards the end of April, early May. It's a great thing to be involved in. And then finally, if you're looking to pursue a career in conservation, look for internships and fellowships. They're a fantastic way to get experience. And if you're experiencing barriers to a career in conservation, there are opportunities out there that are paid and are designed specifically to support marginalized communities. A great example of this, a really fantastic one, is the Seattle Aquarium Empathy Fellowship Program. That fellowship is designed to create a pipeline into careers in aquariums, zoos, and the conservation field for communities of color and other marginalized communities. So that's the advice I have.
Yeah. I think all fantastic for all fantastic for different reasons, and I think brilliant because yes, focusing on one thing, the pangolin, an underappreciated species, is where got me where I am now, so I could endorse that. I would endorse the app iNaturalist because I think, to go back to the video game chat once again, it is essentially Pokemon Go for people who like wildlife. So if you got into Pokemon Go the summer where everybody left their homes and went outside and just looked at screens, then this is another excellent way of kind of like getting out there, but doing something, not just catching Weedles or Caterpies or Pikachus or whatever, but actually making a difference and documenting things. And then yes, I think the internships and the volunteering or the whatever pathway and just getting experience, whether it be through kind of citizen science or whatever, all brilliant. I think fantastic advice. And then the last question, if people want to keep up to date with your work, where can they go to learn more? What should they do? Where can they follow you, or websites that you'd recommend? What should they do?
I think following the United States Fish and Wildlife Service and their red wolf information that they put out there, it's one of the most comprehensive repositories for that information. And it also gives you a very unique insight into how a federal government approaches conservation and all the partners that they work with. I definitely recommend reading that link I know you're going to put in there to the revised American Red Wolf Recovery Plan, and then sharing your thoughts and comments on social media, whether it be through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service during public comment periods, or just sharing it on your personal feeds, your Facebook and your LinkedIn and whatever the kids are doing these days. The more people talking about red wolves, the more engaged that they're going to become in conservation. And that's one of the greatest gifts that the rise of the internet and social media has given us, is to be more engaged in these conservation conversations and to share thoughts and opinions and get inspired. And we're currently, the SAFE program is working on a new 5-year action plan, which I mentioned. It's going to directly support the revised recovery plan. So be looking in the near future for new ways that we'll be engaging with the community. Visit and support facilities that care for American red wolves, like Point Defiance Zoo Aquarium and Northwest Trek Wildlife Park. That's an important thing you can do to get engaged. And I'll leave you with my final thought, is it takes all of us working together to realize our vision of a future where American red wolves don't just survive, but thrive. We need all of you. So please join us.
Mm-hmm. That is the perfect, inspirational, wonderful, brilliant note to end on. And as you said, I will put all of the links and everything in the description of the episode, so people can go down there, they can learn more, and they can join you and make sure that this work gets done, and they can help you get to this goal. I can't wait to see where this ends up. I'm so excited to kind of keep up to date with this project. It is going to be fantastic. And I guess that brings us, sadly, to the end of our time and to the end of our conversation. So I guess all that remains is to, of course, say please check out the links for all of those things in the description. Down there will also be links to the podcast social media. So while you're on social media anyway, go and have a look. Subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a nice review if you would. And, of course, the main thing is to say a huge thank you to you, Craig, for your time and your insights. And I know you said this was your first ever podcast, but I think you've nailed it. If you'd never said that in the beginning, we never would have known. You've smashed it. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, Jack, thank you for having me. Thank you for putting a spotlight on the story of this amazing animal, the American red wolf. And, personally, thank you for helping me achieve one of my bucket list items to be on the podcast. It's been delightful.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure for me too. And yes, I'm always glad to make dreams come true on the podcast. Oh, well, on that very positive note, I will say a huge thank you once again, and a huge thank you, of course, to the listeners for tuning in. And one final pressure to go and check out all the links we mentioned. And yes, I guess until next time, thank you, and goodbye.